They sent them first, the diplomats, the brave ones, or maybe the foolish ones. I never got a chance to meet them personally, but I remember the silence after their arrival. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of the unknown. When the first envoy returned, what came back was not the same. Bodies shattered in ways no human should survive. Minds scrambled, gibbering fragments of alien thoughts bleeding into madness. Some were never found. Others, well, what was left of them barely resembled the people we sent out. They called it a failure, a warning. I volunteered to take the next mission. People said I was crazy. Others said I was arrogant. Maybe they were right. But for me, this was more than just a diplomatic mission. It was a chance to stare into the darkness that had swallowed those before me, and maybe, just maybe, to bring back a sliver of hope or revenge. I still remember the night before I left Earth. The sky was the kind of deep blue that felt like a wound in the universe, vast, cold, endless. My apartment overlooked the city, lights flickering like nervous stars. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Somewhere else, laughter spilled out of a bar. I packed my bag with the essentials, a translator implant, several encrypted data drives, a sidearm, though I doubted I'd ever need it, and a thick dossier labeled Zarashi Accord. The government called it an interstellar peace effort. I called it a gamble on the edge of extinction. The Zarashi were one of the oldest known civilizations in the galaxy, older than our sun by hundreds of millions of years. We didn't even know if they were truly sentient or some form of cosmic intelligence, until the first contact was made 10 years ago. That contact ended disastrously. Our planet, Earth, was a fractured world at the time. War, climate collapse, political unrest, the usual chaos of a species scrambling to survive. Yet when the Zarashi sent their emissaries, it was clear they were offering something we had never dared imagine: peace. But that peace came with a price. Their terms were vague, their technology unfathomable. And when our first envoys arrived at the Accord's orbital station, everything went dark. The orbital station was called the Silent Spire, a monolithic structure floating like a black needle against the stars. Our first envoy was supposed to dock there, meet the Zarashi delegates, and negotiate terms for an alliance. Instead, their ship sent one last garbled transmission, a scream, a crash, then silence. Months later, when their replacement was sent, all that returned was shattered wreckage and a few broken minds. It was as if the Zarashi had destroyed them from within, psychologically, physically, and something else I couldn't put my finger on. Our leaders hesitated. Many wanted to pull back, to abandon the dream of alliance. Some whispered that humanity wasn't ready to face such ancient power. But I wasn't one of them. I grew up in a world of stories, stories about humanity's resilience, about the indomitable spirit that pushed us from caves to colonies on Mars. I had always believed that when it came down to it, humans fought with more than just guns or technology. We fought with will. When I volunteered, it wasn't because I believed we could win with brute force. We were outmatched in every measurable way, but I believed in something they hadn't seen yet, something raw and unyielding. The day of my departure arrived faster than I expected. The government sent me off with a cold efficiency that barely masked their fear. My family barely spoke to me. My closest friends called me reckless. But as the shuttle detached from Earth's atmosphere and punched into the black, all I could think about was the mission ahead. I was going to meet the Zarashi. I was going to face whatever darkness had swallowed our envoys. And I was going to bring humanity to the table, no matter the cost. The journey was long. The ship I rode wasn't a warship or a luxury liner. It was a diplomatic cruiser, stripped down for function. No loudspeakers, no unnecessary crew. Just me, the pilot, and a few AI systems monitoring life support. Days blurred into nights in the cold vacuum of space. I spent hours reviewing the scant intelligence we had on the Zarashi, fractal communication patterns, zero-point energy manipulation, mind-link technologies. Most of it was incomprehensible, even with our best quantum translators. But the strangest part was what wasn't in the files: their culture, their motives, even their physical form. The Zarashi didn't look like anything we recognized. Or maybe they looked like everything we didn't want to see. As we approached the coordinates for the Silent Spire, my heart pounded, not with fear, but with a strange kind of excitement. The station came into view, a jagged shard of black metal twisting against the stars. There were no signs of life, no welcoming signals, just the cold hum of ancient machinery. I docked the cruiser with careful precision. The airlock hissed open, and I stepped inside, my boots echoing in the hollow corridors. The station was a tomb, walls scarred with strange glyphs, flickering lights barely illuminating empty halls. I moved cautiously, every step a whisper in the silence. Then I found the message. A single data crystal, left on a pedestal in the main chamber, pulsing with a faint light. I picked it up and plugged it into my translator. What I saw and heard was a recording from the first envoy. Their faces were pale, voices broken, eyes wide with terror. We thought we could negotiate. Their words ended abruptly in a scream that echoed in my mind long after the playback stopped. That was the moment I realized something crucial. The Zarashi didn't just want peace. They wanted to test us, to see if humanity was worthy. I spent hours in the station's archives, piecing together what I could. The Zarashi had survived wars that shattered galaxies. They communicated with mind-bending signals that could twist your thoughts into knots. Our envoys had been swallowed by something they couldn't understand, a psychological assault that broke their minds before their bodies. But I was different. I wasn't just a diplomat. I was a survivor, and I had a plan. Before I left the Silent Spire, I recorded a message for Earth. Not a plea, not a surrender, a declaration. We are coming back, not as supplicants, but as equals. We will learn your language, your fears, your strengths. We will meet your silence with our voice, and we will show you what it means to face humanity. The journey back to the station for the real negotiation was only the beginning. What came next would test everything I believed about diplomacy, war, and the strength of the human spirit. But I had made my choice. I would face the darkness, because if humanity could survive its own destruction, then maybe we could survive the stars too. When I first heard the phrase Zarashi communication, I imagined something like Morse code, flashing lights, rhythmic beeps, maybe a complex, alien syntax. I was wrong, so very wrong. Their language wasn't a language at all, not by any human definition. It was geometry. No, worse than geometry. It was the language of shadows, fractals folding in on themselves, light bending and refracting into impossible shapes that danced and shifted faster than your eye could follow. It was a conversation in a kaleidoscope, where every turn of the prism twisted meaning deeper into abstraction. The first time I tried to understand it, I nearly lost my mind. I was strapped into the neural interface, the synaptic translator implant buzzing at the base of my skull. The Zarashi communication wasn't just transmitted into my ears. It flooded my entire nervous system, overwhelming every sense. Colors exploded behind my eyelids, shapes warped into impossible dimensions, and waves of emotion, fear, curiosity, rage washed through me before I could even make sense of the images. I gasped, clawing at my temples as my brain scrambled to decode. "You have to slow it down," the AI voice whispered, calm and patient. "Can't," I muttered through clenched teeth. "It's like trying to read a hurricane." The neural interface could filter some of the raw data, stretch the signals into manageable pulses. But the Zarashi didn't speak like we did. Their language was multidimensional, layered across time, space, and thought. What we heard was only a fraction. The station's communication chamber was designed to accommodate this onslaught. A spherical room lined with adaptive hollow panels that projected fractal patterns around me, syncing with the incoming signals. It was beautiful in a way that made my skin crawl. Our first official meeting was tense. The Zarashi delegate arrived through a shimmering gateway, a ripple in the fabric of space that distorted everything around it. They didn't look like us, not even close. Imagine a shifting mass of light and shadow, a form that never stayed the same twice. No face, no eyes, no limbs. Just a flickering silhouette that hummed with barely restrained power. They spoke without sound. The fractal patterns exploded into the room, sharp-edged geometric shapes that folded and unfolded in hypnotic patterns. At first, it felt like chaos. But as the translator interface adjusted, the chaos sorted into meaning. The message was simple. Greetings, human. But greetings was a swirling storm of colors and shapes, imbued with respect, caution, and curiosity all at once. I struggled to respond. The interface tried to piece together my words, but translating human speech into fractals was like trying to sculpt clouds. At one point, my words came out as a tangled mess, something closer to a threat than a greeting. The Zarashi flickered, a sign of confusion or irritation. I couldn't tell. I swallowed my frustration. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Late into the second day, after hours of failed attempts, I started seeing patterns, not just in their language, but in the way they thought. The Zarashi communicated not just with words, but with intent. Every shift in their fractal language carried multiple layers: surface meaning, emotion, history, even strategic calculation. It was like reading a text and hearing an entire symphony at the same time. To communicate, I had to match their rhythm, not just their words. That night, I stayed in the chamber alone, practicing. I closed my eyes and let the fractals wash over me, training my mind to catch the subtle shifts, the tiny echoes of feeling beneath the patterns. Slowly, I began to understand. The Zarashi language was a mirror of their civilization, ancient, complex, and beautiful in its cruelty. They communicated in shadows because that was all they had left. The physical forms they once had long since vanished. What remained was thought and will, encoded in fractal patterns that warped reality. The challenge wasn't just learning to speak, it was learning to think like them. I remember one particular session. The fractal storm swirled into a complex pattern, something like a question, but deeper, a challenge. I reached out, matching the pattern with my own carefully crafted response. It was a gamble. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shadows shifted. They answered. It was the first real conversation we had. Over the next weeks, the conversations deepened. The Zarashi shared fragments of their history, their fears, and their hopes. But there was something else, an undercurrent of urgency, like the ticking of a clock beneath their words. They were running out of time. I learned that the Zarashi civilization had once spanned galaxies, their thoughts weaving through the cosmos like threads in a tapestry. But a shadow had fallen over them, a war older than memory, a darkness that consumed light and life. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here we were, two species on the edge of extinction, trying to find common ground in the silence between stars. The diplomacy was grueling. Every word was a battle, every gesture, a test. If I blinked, I lost. If I hesitated, they would exploit it. But I found strength in our differences. Where they were shadows, we were fire. Where they bent reality with thought, we shaped it with action. I taught myself to speak their language, not just with words, but with will. One night, after a particularly intense session, I collapsed in the chamber. The fractal pattern slowly faded, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't dared admit: hope. Maybe humanity wasn't just a desperate gamble. Maybe we were the wild card the galaxy had been waiting for. But that hope was fragile, because the deeper I learned their language, the more I realized something terrifying. The Zarashi didn't want to just negotiate. They wanted to test us, to see if humanity had the strength to survive what was coming. And I wasn't sure if we did. Trust, such a fragile word. In diplomacy, it was the currency of survival, the thin thread on which the fate of civilizations balanced. With the Zarashi, trust was something else entirely: an abyss, dark and bottomless, daring you to leap without knowing if you would fall or fly. After weeks of fractal dialogues, of matching shadows with light, the Zarashi made an unexpected move, a summons, a meeting in the heart of the silent spire, the core chamber, where no human had set foot since the first envoy vanished. The message was clear: if you want peace, you must prove yourself worthy. I wasn't naive. I knew this was a test, one designed to strip away every pretense, every lie we hid behind as humans. It was a crucible, and I was about to step into the fire. The path to the core chamber was a journey through the station's veins, dark corridors alive with whispers of ancient technology. I was escorted by a silent projection, neither human nor fully Zarashi, something in between, a shapeshifter of light and shadow that shimmered at the edges of perception. It was disorienting. Every step felt like walking between realities. When I entered the chamber, the air changed. It was no longer cold and lifeless. Instead, it vibrated with energy, like standing at the edge of a storm. The chamber was vast, a cathedral of fractals spiraling into infinity. The Zarashi delegate waited. This time, the form was different, less chaotic, more defined. A figure that seemed almost human in shape, but still shifting, still impossible to fully grasp. Their fractal language danced around us, weaving threads of meaning. They spoke without words. Their message was simple but heavy. Trust is not given. It is earned through sacrifice. I swallowed hard. What must I do? I asked, voice steady despite the storm inside. The fractals responded, shaping into a pattern that translated in my mind. A trial of mind and spirit. To survive, you must face your deepest fears and reveal your true self. I nodded, knowing this was no metaphor. The Zarashi had learned our psychology better than we knew ourselves. This trial would strip me bare. The chamber darkened. The fractal spirals collapsed into a single point of light, and then exploded outward, casting me into visions. The first vision was Earth, my home, but it was not the Earth I remembered. Cities burned, oceans boiled, skies blackened by ash. I saw my family running, desperate and terrified. I reached out, but the vision shifted. The second vision was myself, alone, trapped in an endless void. No sound, no light, just me and the crushing weight of silence. I felt the walls closing in, panic rising, suffocation tightening its grip. I fought the urge to scream. I had trained for this. I had learned to face fear, to master doubt. But this was different. This was a war within my own mind. Suddenly, the vision changed again. I was back in the chamber, standing before the Zarashi. Their fractals now pulsed gently on invitation. You must choose, the message said. Reveal your fear and accept it, or deny it and be consumed. I hesitated. To admit fear was weakness. My instinct screamed. But I had learned better. I closed my eyes. I let the visions flood me. I faced the terror of losing everything I loved. I faced the loneliness of the void. I faced the shadow that lurked in my own heart. And I spoke, not in words, but in fractals, my own language shaped from human will and raw emotion. I gave them my truth. The chamber trembled. The fractals brightened, and the Zarashi shifted into a form of pure light. They had accepted me. Trust. Fragile, yes, but earned. In the days that followed, the tone of our conversations changed. The Zarashi became more open, sharing fragments of their own fears and hopes. They spoke of a cosmic darkness, an ancient enemy that had chased them through the stars, consuming worlds and minds alike. We are not the hunters, they said. We are the hunted. Their vulnerability was both terrifying and humanizing. Here was a species that had transcended flesh and bone, yet still carried scars of loss and fear. I realized then that diplomacy was not just about words. It was about connection, understanding, empathy, and in that connection, I found a spark of hope. But the trial had left its mark. I was changed. The visions haunted my dreams. The shadows whispered doubts. Could humanity really survive what was coming? Could I? Only time would tell. Trust is a fragile thing. But alliances? Alliances are even more delicate. The moment you think you've built something unbreakable, reality reminds you how easily it shatters. After the crucible and the silent spire, things should have gone smoothly. We'd proven ourselves to the Zarashi. They'd shown a flicker of trust, and the path to peace seemed within reach. That was the hope. But hope is a dangerous thing to rely on. Back on the Horizon Star, the flagship of the human diplomatic corps, tensions simmered beneath the polished floors and sterile walls. Our delegation was a microcosm of Earth's fractured politics, a tangled mess of ideologies, ambitions, and agendas. I watched it all unfold, caught between duty and doubt. Colonel Miriam Kale, our military liaison, was the first to voice her concerns. Her words were sharp, clipped like gunfire. We can't trust them, she said during the strategy meeting. The Zarashi are shadows. Shadows don't keep promises. Her eyes burned with a cold fire. We need to be ready to fight. Diplomacy won't save us. Her stance was shared by many in the military and security sectors. They saw the Zarashi as an existential threat, an alien species with unknowable motives. To them, peace was a naive dream. On the other side was Ambassador Li Wei, our chief diplomat, the very image of calm and grace. He argued the opposite. We must build bridges, not walls, he said, voice steady, eye serene. Trust is the foundation of peace. If we fracture now, the consequences will be catastrophic. The room fractured under the weight of their opposing visions. I sat quietly, caught in the middle. My own heart was torn. I believed in diplomacy. I had devoted my life to it. But I couldn't ignore the fear clawing at me. The visions in the silent spire haunted my mind like ghosts. The fractures ran deeper than politics. There was distrust between our scientists and the military experts, suspicion between our politicians and our negotiators. The Zarashi's language, the fractal shadows, had become a symbol of our divide. Some saw it as a puzzle to be solved, a bridge to understanding. Others saw it as a weapon, an alien cipher hiding deadly secrets. The debate spilled into every corner of the ship. In the corridors, whispers filled the air like static. Some claimed the Zarashi were manipulating us, playing a long game we couldn't comprehend. Others believed that humanity was the key to salvation, that our unpredictable nature was exactly what the galaxy needed. I tried to stay above the fray. My job was to keep communication open, to mediate, to find common ground. But the cracks were spreading fast. One evening, I was called to a private meeting with Ambassador Li Wei. He looked tired, more human than diplomat in that moment. "We're on the edge," he said quietly. "Not just with the Zarashi, but within ourselves." He pulled up a holographic map of political factions on Earth. Every faction wants something different. Some want war, others want peace, and most just want to survive. He sighed. "This alliance with the Zarashi, it's our best hope. But if we fracture now, it's over." I nodded. "I'm trying." "We all are," he said. "But it might not be enough." The following day, the cracks turned into fractures. A leak in the intelligence network revealed that certain factions in the human coalition were planning covert operations, sabotage, espionage, even assassination attempts against the Zarashi delegation. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I confronted Colonel Kale. Her expression was unreadable. "We can't trust them," she repeated. "If they're so advanced, why are they still fighting shadows? Why hide behind cryptic languages and tests?" I pressed her. "Do you want war?" She didn't answer. The tension exploded. The Zarashi learned about the sabotage attempts before we could contain the leak. Their response was swift and chilling. They suspended all diplomatic talks. The fractal patterns that once danced with cautious warmth turned cold, sharp, jagged, like shattered glass. For the first time, I saw fear, not human fear, but something older, deeper. The Zarashi were afraid. They retreated behind the Silent Spire's defenses, cutting off all contact except through encrypted channels. The Horizon Star fell into a tense silence. Our fragile alliance was crumbling. In the solitude of my quarters, I stared at the neural interface resting on my desk. The same device that connected me to the Zarashi, the key to understanding them, now felt like a curse. I realized that diplomacy wasn't just about words or gestures. It was a battle for hearts and minds. And right now, we were losing. But there was one thread of hope left. The Zarashi had left a message, one last fractal pattern before retreating into silence. It was a riddle, a challenge. If you seek peace, prove your worth. I stared at the pattern, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on my shoulders. The alliance was fractured, but not broken. If humanity was to survive this crucible, we had to mend the fractures within ourselves first. And that meant confronting not just the Zarashi's shadows, but our own. The past is a weight, sometimes invisible, but always there, pulling, dragging, shaping everything we try to build. In diplomacy, especially with an alien species like the Zarashi, the past was not just history. It was a prism that refracted every word, every gesture, every hesitation. It was the shadow that followed us into every meeting room, every negotiation, every silence. After the alliance fractured and talks stalled, I knew the key to moving forward lay buried in the past, both ours and theirs. The Zarashi weren't just mysterious alien beings with fractal language and incomprehensible motives. They had a history, a story, a shadow they ran from, and so did we. The Horizon Star floated silently near the Silent Spire, an island of fragile humanity in an ocean of unknowns. I was called to a special briefing by Ambassador Li Wei. The briefing room was stark, illuminated only by a holographic map of the galaxy, dotted with glowing points marking star systems, fleets, and ruins. Li Wei stood before it, his face grave, the weight of his office pressing down. "We need to understand them," he said. "Truly understand the Zarashi, if we want to save this alliance." He gestured, and the hologram zoomed in on the Zarashi home system, an ancient star cluster far from Earth. "We've intercepted fragments of their history," Li Wei continued. "Data recovered from ruins, from ancient spacefarers who encountered them centuries ago." He paused, then played a series of images, cryptic patterns, symbols, star charts, and a few fragmented recordings. The Zarashi were once a physical species, not the fractal shadows we saw now. Long ago, their civilization had been ravaged by a cosmic plague, an ancient, malevolent force that twisted their biology and technology, forcing them into a new form of existence. They had been forced to abandon flesh for fractals, mind for pattern. This transformation was not a choice, but a desperate survival. And it left scars, not just physical, but psychological and cultural. They had lost much more than bodies. They lost their past, their identity, their history rewritten into fractal memory. The Zarashi's fragmented memory spoke of betrayal, loss, and exile. Their ancient enemies, the Vrifi, had hunted them relentlessly. The Vrifi were creatures of chaos, consuming worlds and minds alike. They were the darkness chasing the Zarashi across the stars. It was the same darkness the Zarashi feared would one day consume all life, including us. Listening to this, I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. This wasn't just a political conflict. It was a cosmic nightmare. Then the briefing turned to us. Human history is not without shadows either, Li Wei said quietly. He brought up images of Earth's own dark past. Wars, genocides, betrayals we'd never fully acknowledged. We carry those shadows with us, he said. We hide behind progress and technology, but our history is stained with the same fears and violence we accuse the Zarashi of. His words hit me harder than I expected. I realized the fractures in our alliance weren't just about strategy or distrust. They were about fear. Fear rooted in history, in memory, in trauma. That afternoon, I requested a private session with the Zarashi delegation through the neural interface. I needed to bridge the gap between our histories, between our shadows. When the fractal patterns of the Zarashi appeared in my mind, I greeted them with honesty. I know your past, I said. My thoughts translated into fractal shapes. I know the darkness you fled. There was a long silence. Then the fractal shifted, tentative, like a child reaching for a stranger's hand. And we know your past. The message came. Your wars, your betrayals, your own shadows. In that moment, I understood something fundamental. Trust was not about denying the past. It was about acknowledging it together. We spent hours sharing memories, mine, theirs, human, and Zarashi alike. I shared stories of Earth's darkest days, the fall of civilizations, the betrayals between nations, the moments we almost destroyed ourselves. The Zarashi shared their own memories, fractured glimpses of lost cities, shattered minds, and relentless pursuit by the Vrifi. There was pain in those memories, but also a fragile hope. Hope that by facing our shadows, we could build something stronger. But not everyone on the Horizon Star saw it that way. When word of my private session leaked, accusations flew. Betrayal, shouted one faction leader during a council meeting. How can you trust them after all they've done to us? Others called for renewed military action. I stood and faced them, my voice steady but fierce. We are at a crossroads, I said. We can let fear control us, let history dictate our future, or we can learn from our past, confront our shadows, and choose a different path. There was silence. Not everyone was convinced, but for the first time, a seed of understanding had been planted. Later, as I walked the ship's observation deck, I looked out into the vastness of space. Stars burned cold and distant, but among them, the silent spire glowed faintly, a beacon of fragile hope in the darkness. I thought about the road ahead. The shadows of the past were long and dark, but they were not unbreakable. If humanity and the Zarashi could face their histories together, then maybe, just maybe, there was a future worth fighting for. Trust, such a simple word, yet it felt like the hardest thing to forge in the galaxy. After the fragile breakthroughs of our shared histories in Chapter 5, I had hoped the path forward would be clearer, that perhaps the fractures within our alliance and between us and the Zarashi would begin to heal. But hope, I was learning, was a slow fire, flickering and easily snuffed out. The Horizon Star was abuzz with tension. The political factions aboard were restless, and the Zarashi remained distant, their fractal shadows retreating into inscrutable patterns of silence and half-communication. Ambassador Li Wei summoned me to a private meeting. His eyes were heavy with fatigue. We've come far, he said, but it's not enough. He slid a hollow screen across the table. Images of a proposed joint mission to the ruins of an ancient starbase, deep in a contested system on the border between Zarashi and human space. A test, he said quietly. A crucible. The mission would force human and Zarashi teams to work together in hostile territory, to depend on one another, to bridge the cultural divide, and to face the unknown as one. I agreed immediately. If trust was going to be forged, it would have to be in the heat of shared danger. Preparations began immediately. The joint expedition was small but symbolic. A dozen human operatives, 12 Zarashi fractal avatars linked through the neural interface. Our goal was to investigate the ruins of the starbase, rumored to hold relics of Zarashi's pre-fractal civilization. But it was more than archaeology. It was about understanding, cooperation, and trust. Colonel Miriam Kale was named the human mission commander. Her icy skepticism toward the Zarashi remained, but she understood the importance of the mission. In the briefings, tensions bubbled just beneath the surface. Don't forget, Kale warned me one afternoon. They might look like fractals, but they're still aliens. We can't afford to let our guard down. I nodded, but inside, I felt the burden of being the bridge between two worlds. When the day of departure arrived, the expedition boarded a sleek shuttle bound for the derelict starbase. The silence inside the shuttle was heavy. Across from me sat Tal, the Zarashi delegation's lead fractal avatar. Her form shimmered, patterns shifting in hypnotic waves. We exchanged tentative greetings through the neural interface. The shadows are long here, she conveyed, but so is the light we seek. The shuttle's engines roared as we descended toward the ruins, silent, ancient, and half-buried in the swirling nebula. The moment we set foot, or fractal, on the desolate platform, the mission's true test began. The ruins were a maze of crumbled walls and fractured technology. The air was thick with silence and memories. Every step forward demanded cooperation. A trap here, an unstable structure there. Kale's military training helped identify hazards. Tal's fractal perception revealed hidden patterns and safe paths. Together, we navigated the maze. But it wasn't just the ruins that tested us. The mission revealed the fractures within our own team. Human operatives whispered suspicions about the Zarashi. Some refused to share information fully, fearing betrayal. The Zarashi avatars reacted with cold withdrawal, their fractal forms pulsing erratically, an alien display of discomfort. I found myself mediating disputes more than exploring the ruins. At one point, a hidden energy surge caught us off guard. The lights flickered, the ground trembled, and an ancient defense system activated. In the chaos, Kale ordered a retreat, but Tal argued for pressing forward. Sensing that the surge was a test left by the starbase creators, a final challenge. Trust the patterns, she urged. Only together can we survive this. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of leadership. Against my better judgment and Kale's protests, I convinced the team to press forward, relying on both human grit and Zarashi insight. It was a gamble, but it paid off. We disabled the defense system and uncovered a sealed chamber deep within the ruins. Inside was a holographic archive, ancient Zarashi history, preserved in fractal form. As I interfaced with the archive, memories flooded my mind, visions of Zarashi cities before the plague, their struggles, triumphs, and eventual transformation. But there was more. The archive revealed a warning. The Vrithi, the cosmic predators who had hunted the Zarashi, were not gone. They were regrouping, their shadows stretching toward human space. The fragile peace we were forging was under immediate threat. Returning to the shuttle, the mood was somber but unified. Kale approached me. Her usual frost softened. You were right, she admitted quietly. Trust, it's not just a word. It's a weapon and a shield. Tal shimmered beside her. The crucible has been passed, she said, but the fires are just beginning. Back aboard the Horizon Star, news of our success spread cautiously. The joint mission was hailed as a step forward, proof that cooperation was possible. But it was also a warning. The galaxy was darker than we had imagined, and trust would be the only thing standing between peace and annihilation. In the quiet moments afterward, I found myself staring out at the stars again. I thought about the shadows we faced, external threats and internal doubts, and about the fragile threads of trust we had woven in that ancient starbase. I knew this was only the beginning. The crucible was far from over, and I was caught in the heart of the fire. They say diplomacy is a game of patience and steel. A tightrope walk over a chasm where one false move can shatter fragile peace. At the edge of diplomacy, there is no room for error. After our mission to the ancient starbase, trust had begun to sprout, fragile, trembling, but real. Yet, that fragile trust was not enough to smooth the razor's edge on which our alliance balanced. The political factions aboard the Horizon Star grew louder. Voices demanding more aggressive action against the Vrethi. Voices warning against trusting a species who still wore their past like armor, fractured and cold. Ambassador Li Wei called for an emergency summit. The summit chamber was packed. Representatives from human nations, Zarashi fractal delegates, military commanders, intelligence officers, all gathered under one roof. I stood near the entrance, watching as the crowd settled. This was the moment. The moment we would decide if cooperation would survive the storm or be crushed by it. Li Wei opened the meeting. "We face an existential threat," he said plainly. "The Vrethi advance. Our intelligence confirms their fleets are massing on the border." A murmur rippled through the room. "Some here believe our best option is preemptive strike," he continued. "Others argue for continued diplomacy and alliance." The debate began. Colonel Kale spoke first, her voice sharp and unwavering. "We cannot wait for the Vrethi to attack. Our enemies see weakness and hesitation as opportunity." Her words struck a chord with the military commanders. But the Zarashi fractal ambassador, S.H. Lara, responded with a calm that cut through the tension. "Rash actions breed ruin," she said. "Our people survived the plague by patience and adaptation. We must use the same now." The room fell silent. For a moment, it seemed impossible to find common ground. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of the past chapters, the shared histories, the joint mission, the fragile trust we had built. "Both sides are right," I said quietly. "We are at the edge. We must prepare for conflict, but also hold open the door for peace." There was a murmur of agreement. Li Wei nodded. "We need a balanced approach," he said. "Military readiness coupled with intensified diplomacy." That meant more meetings, more negotiations, more pressure. But the pressure was already mounting in unexpected ways. Rumors spread that a faction within the Zarashi, hardened by centuries of exile and loss, opposed the alliance entirely. They called themselves the Khazul, the shadows of the past. The Khazul believed the only way to survive was total isolation and ultimate destruction of any perceived threat, including humanity. Their influence was growing. I found myself drawn into the murky world of espionage and shadow politics. One night, a clandestine message reached me through encrypted channels, an anonymous warning. "The Khazul move in silence. They will strike before the dawn. Trust no one." I showed the message to Li Wei. His face hardened. "We cannot ignore this," he said. "We must root out the dissenters before they sabotage everything." But rooting out shadows was never easy. Our intelligence teams worked feverishly, tracing whispers and coded signals. I accompanied a small team to the lower decks of the Horizon Star, where many Zarashi fractal avatars were housed and linked through the neural interface. There, I confronted S.H. Carr, a Zarashi elder who had once been a vocal advocate for peace. But recently, his fractal patterns had grown jagged, signs of inner turmoil. "S.H. Carr," I began gently, "we've heard rumors of Khazul activity. What do you know?" His fractal form shimmered with conflicted emotion. "The past does not die," he replied. "It waits. It hungers." He warned that the Khazul were planning something devastating, an act of sabotage aimed at the heart of the alliance. I realized then that diplomacy was more than words. It was survival. The next days were a whirlwind. Security was tightened. Meetings became guarded, eyes wary. The Khazul struck first. A sabotage attempt disabled the main neural interface hub, the lifeline between humans and Zarashi. Communication broke down. Panic surged through the Horizon Star. Without the neural link, the fractal avatars could not coordinate with human teams. Old fears and prejudices flared. I was called to the bridge, where Li Wei and Kale were deep in crisis talks. "We're on the brink," Kale said grimly. "Trust is unraveling faster than we can repair it." I felt a bitter irony. The crucible of trust was now a furnace. We had to act fast. I proposed a daring plan. Using analog communication protocols, ancient human diplomatic methods combined with Zarashi pattern signaling to re-establish contact without the neural hub. It was risky and slow, but it worked. Gradually, we rebuilt communication, and with it, the fragile bridge between our peoples. But the damage was done. The Khazul strike had shaken the foundation. I confronted S.H. Lara in a tense meeting. "This is war within war," I told her. "We must root out the Khazul before they destroy everything we've built." She nodded, fractal pattern steady. "We will stand together," she replied. That night, as I lay in my quarters staring at the stars, I understood something profound. Diplomacy wasn't a path of ease. It was a battleground between fear and hope, between old wounds and new possibilities. And I was caught in its heart, an unlikely ambassador on the edge of a fragile peace. The shadows of the past still moved in silence, but so did the flicker of light. The past isn't just a shadow behind us. It's a living echo. It shapes us, haunts us, warns us. Sometimes, the past reaches out across time, demanding to be heard. That's what I realized when the Zarashi unveiled the ancient archive we discovered in the Starbase ruins. We thought we had only uncovered history, fractal patterns frozen in time, records of a civilization lost to plague and exile. But as the holographic archive streamed into the neural interface, I understood these echoes were far more than memories. They were a message. The message was urgent. Ambassador S.H. Lara summoned me to the Zarashi Council chamber, a vast dome of shifting fractal light that felt alive with centuries of wisdom. "Come," she said simply, her fractal form shifting into an intricate pattern of blue and gold. Inside, the council elders gathered. Their fractal avatars shimmered in complex, almost hypnotic patterns. Each pulse a story, each wave a thought. "The archive reveals more than history," S.H. Lara said, her voice steady. "It reveals a warning and a choice." The Zarashi elders began interfacing with the archive, and I connected as well, feeling the familiar hum of the neural link. What we saw was staggering. The starbase was once a beacon, an ancient outpost of the Zarashi's pre-fractal civilization. It was a place of knowledge, diplomacy, and exploration. But it was also a prison for the Vrithi, dark predators from the void, whose very presence twisted reality around them. The Zarashi ancestors had trapped the Vrithi here, in stasis, using technology lost to time. The archive revealed the terrible cost. The technology was unstable, and the prison was weakening. If the Vrithi were to break free, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for the Zarashi, but for all nearby civilizations. I felt the weight of the revelation settle deep in my chest. The Vrithi threat was more immediate and more dangerous than anyone had realized. But the archive held something else, a clue to stopping the Vrithi once and for all. An ancient device, hidden within the starbase's deepest chamber, a weapon of light and fractal energy, designed to contain the predators forever. But accessing it would require more than technology. It would require trust. The device could only be activated by a bond, a merging of human and Zarashi consciousness, a union forged in understanding and sacrifice. I looked around at the council. The elders' fractal forms flickered with hesitation. This was no simple diplomatic mission. This was a leap into the unknown, into the heart of unity itself. Back aboard the Horizon Star, I convened a meeting with Li Wei, Kale, and S.H. Lara. I laid out the revelations, explaining the archive, the prison, and the device. Kale was skeptical. "This is beyond us," she said. "Too dangerous." S.H. Lara was resolute. "If we do not try," she said, "all will be lost." Li Wei was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "We proceed," he said firmly. The plan was set. A joint human Zarashi team would return to the starbase, navigate its ruins once more, and seek the device. But this time, the stakes were higher. The device required the neural merging of a human and a Zarashi, a bond that went beyond words or shared goals. It demanded trust in its purest, most vulnerable form. I was chosen as the human half. Tal, the fractal avatar who had led our earlier mission, volunteered as my partner. We spent days preparing, learning the ancient protocols, syncing our neural patterns, and opening ourselves to the merging process. It was unlike anything I had experienced. As the neural interface deepened, I felt my consciousness stretching, reaching toward Tal's fractal mind. We shared memories, visions of our worlds, our fears, and hopes. The boundary between human and fractal blurred. But with the union came vulnerability. I could feel her emotions as if they were my own. Waves of grief, hope, and fierce determination. She felt my doubts and fears in return. Together, we became a single entity, two minds intertwined across species and form. And with the union came power. The device activated. A brilliant cascade of fractal light pulsed from the starbase core, an energy wave that rippled across the nebula. It sealed the weakening prison, re-establishing the barrier that held the Vrithi at bay. The room was silent. Then the council erupted in fractal patterns of joy and relief. But for me and Tal, the experience left a deep mark. The bond we forged was not easily undone. We were connected now, mind and soul intertwined in ways neither of us fully understood. Back aboard the Horizon Star, the Alliance breathed a collective sigh of relief. Yet, beneath the surface, questions simmered. What did this bond mean for our future? Could humans and Zarashi truly become one, beyond politics and necessity? As I stood on the observation deck, looking out at the stars, I knew the echoes of the past were only the beginning. Our future depended on how we answered the call. Trust was no longer just a fragile thread. It was the foundation of survival, and the past had shown us the way forward. I used to think that peace was simply the absence of war, that cooperation was a steady, unshakable bridge between peoples. But I've learned, sometimes painfully, that peace is fragile, a delicate latticework of trust, fear, compromise, and stubborn willpower. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and the whole thing can fracture. It happened on a day that seemed ordinary enough. The Horizon Star floated in orbit near the border systems, the tension almost palpable in the recycled air. I had been up since dawn, reviewing reports, coordinating with both human and Zarashi teams. The Alliance was stretched thin, supplies were tight, morale was fraying. In the council chamber, the mood was tense. Ambassador Li Wei convened a session to discuss intelligence from our scouts. The scouts had detected increased Vreethi fleet movements, faster, more aggressive patrols. We cannot afford delays, Li Wei said. Every moment wasted risks our entire sector. Colonel Kale leaned forward, her expression grim. Preemptive action is necessary, she said. We cannot rely on the Vreethi to make the first move. SH Lara's fractal avatar shimmered softly as she countered. Diplomacy must remain our primary tool. War benefits the Vreethi, not us. The room divided sharply. I felt myself caught between two worlds, the pragmatism of human command and the cautious wisdom of the Zarashi. Then came the unexpected. A message arrived, not through official channels, but a raw transmission picked up by our signal intelligence. A desperate broadcast from the outer colonies, human settlers who had faced recent Vreethi raids. The colonies were under siege. Their pleas were urgent and raw. Help, evacuation, defense. It was a crisis no one wanted, but everyone feared. Kale's voice rose. We have to act. If the colonies fall, the alliance collapses. Li Wei nodded, but SH Lara hesitated. The Zarashi believed that rushing into battle without full coordination could do more than just the colonies. I saw the fracture widening. Behind the scenes, I sensed deeper tensions. Factions within both species pushing agendas that could shatter the alliance from within. On the human side, hardliners argued for decisive military action, seeing the Zarashi's caution as weakness. Among the Zarashi, some fractals whispered of distrust, fearing humans would exploit the alliance for their own ends. Then there were the causal shadows, still lurking, still striking. I convened a private meeting with Li Wei and SH Lara. We're at a tipping point, I said bluntly. The colony's fate could trigger war or unite us. Li Wei's jaw tightened. We can't afford to lose those settlements. They're human lives and hope. SH Lara's fractal shifted, complex and subtle. But if we sacrifice the alliance for the colonies, what remains? It was the question none of us wanted to face. We decided on a compromise. A joint task force would be sent, mixed human and Zarashi crews, balanced to show solidarity and shared commitment. Kale would command the military contingent. SH Lara would lead the diplomatic and intelligence efforts. I was to act as liaison and coordinator, the fragile thread weaving both worlds together. The task force departed swiftly, slipping through the nebulous folds toward the besieged colonies. Days later, I received the first transmission from the front lines. The colonies were a scene of devastation, burned-out settlements, shattered defenses, terrified survivors. Kale's voice was sharp but controlled as she reported. The Vreethi are ruthless. They strike fast and vanish. We're stretched thin. SH Lara's fractal patterns flickered through the feed, her calm presence a counterbalance to the chaos. But as the mission wore on, cracks began to show. Communication between human and Zarashi troops grew strained. Mistrust seeped into every interaction. There were accusations of withholding resources, of sabotage, of cultural disrespect. The causal shadowy influence seemed to poison even the most basic cooperation. One night, as the task force gathered around a flickering holographic map, a heated argument erupted. Kale accused a Zarashi squad of ignoring critical orders, putting human lives at risk. SH Lara countered that human commanders underestimated the complexities of fractal strategy and terrain. Voices rose, fingers pointed, old fears flared. I stepped between them, raising my hands. "We cannot fracture here," I said firmly. "This mission is more than survival. It is the test of our alliance." But even as I spoke, I knew words alone wouldn't hold the line. The Vrethi attacks intensified. We discovered that the enemy was using a new tactic, hacking into neural interfaces, turning fractal avatars against their own teams. The psychological toll was immense. Zarashi soldiers suffered fractal corruption. Human soldiers battled panic and fear. One of our own fractured team members, SH Carr, the elder who had once warned me of the Khazul, disappeared during a patrol. His fractal form was found fragmented and corrupted, a grim warning of what could happen if we failed. The loss hit us all hard. I spent long hours in the neural interface chamber, trying to stabilize the fractal echoes and trace the source of the corruption. It was a battle of wills, of minds straining against invisible chains. And then, the unthinkable happened. An emergency broadcast came through from the Horizon Star. The Khazul had infiltrated the capital. They struck with coordinated sabotage, destroying communication hubs, disabling defense grids, and spreading fear. The Alliance was under siege from within and without. Li Wei called an emergency session, his voice grave. "We must confront the Khazul's threat head-on," he said. But the question was how. SH Lara proposed a radical idea, a combined human-Zarashi intelligence task force to root out dissenters and infiltrators. Kale, reluctantly, agreed. I was asked to lead the operation. It was a mission into darkness, into the shadows where trust was scarce and every ally could be a traitor. We moved swiftly, working through encrypted channels and deep cover agents. The task force uncovered a network of Khazul cells embedded in key systems, some in military ranks, others in diplomatic corps. Each discovery raised new doubts. How many more had we missed? One particularly dangerous faction was found within the Neural Interface Division itself, those who could manipulate minds in fractal forms. The threat was close, intimate, and terrifying. In the quiet moments between operations, I found myself reflecting on what had brought us here. The fragile trust we had built, now stretched to breaking. The human desire for security. The Zarashi fear of betrayal. The lingering scars of past wars and lost worlds. I realized that the fracture point was not just a political or military crisis. It was a test of our very humanity. Could we hold on to hope and empathy even as fear threatened to consume us? Could we embrace the complexity of our alliance rather than reject it? The answers were not easy, but as I stood on the bridge of the Horizon Star, watching the stars beyond, I vowed to fight for that fragile peace. Because if the alliance fell, if we fractured irreparably, it would not just be a loss for humans or Zarashi. It would be a loss for everything we hoped to become. And I was determined that we would not let fear win. When the moment came, it wasn't loud or dramatic. No explosions shattered the calm. No triumphant speeches heralded victory. Instead, it was a quiet room, a single table, and a handful of weary faces. I sat there, heart pounding, as the representatives gathered. Humans and Zarashi, side by side, but carrying the weight of countless battles, betrayals, and sacrifices. We were at the brink, the fragile alliance teetering on collapse after months of conflict and infiltration by the Khazul. The air was thick with tension, mistrust, and exhaustion. This was the final chance, the last accord that could bind us together or tear us apart forever. The setting. We met aboard the Horizon Star. In the largest diplomatic chamber it held, a circular room bathed in soft ambient light, designed to ease tensions and foster open communication. Around the polished table, holograms flickered, displaying maps of the sector, troop deployments, and recent intelligence reports. To my left, Ambassador Li Wei's calm, weathered face was etched with lines of stress. To my right, SH Lara's fractal form pulsed faintly, a subtle display of her emotions I had grown to understand. Between us sat representatives of other coalition members, each carrying their own fears and agendas. Opening the accord, Li Wei spoke first. His voice was steady but heavy. "We stand at the edge of a new era, or the abyss. Our enemies seek to divide us. The Khazul have infiltrated deeply, but more dangerous than their weapons are the fractures within us." He paused, meeting each of our eyes. We must choose unity or destruction. SH Lara's fractal shifted softly. The Zarashi believe in harmony between minds, between species. But harmony requires trust, and trust has been tested. Yet, we must hold to it. I nodded. We've seen what happens when that trust fails. We lost good people. We came close to losing everything. But this alliance, our alliance, is more than just a strategic necessity. It's a testament to what we can achieve when we rise above fear. The core of the negotiation. The conversation quickly moved into the thorny details. How to root out the remaining causal cells without igniting further suspicion. How to rebuild communication and intelligence channels that have been compromised. How to share sensitive technology and knowledge without risking another betrayal. Arguments flared. Old wounds reopened. Some human delegates argued for a purge, strict military control and surveillance, sacrificing privacy for security. The Zarashi feared that would destroy the delicate fractal neural network that bound their society. A middle path was proposed, a joint intelligence council with equal representation to oversee security operations and share data transparently. But how to guarantee transparency when so much was shrouded in secrecy? That's when I proposed a solution that had been brewing in my mind. A protocol, a binding agreement enforced by a shared quantum encryption system tied to both human and Zarashi neural signatures. An unbreakable key held in trust by both species, I explained. Neither side can act without the other's consent. It's a safeguard against rogue actions and infiltration. The room fell silent. It was a radical idea, one that required unprecedented levels of trust. But it was the only way forward, a breakthrough. As discussion stretched through hours, the mood shifted. What began as suspicion slowly transformed into cautious hope. Li Wei and SH Lara took the lead, bridging gaps and calming tempers. We acknowledged the sacrifices, the pain, the losses, and we pledged to rebuild not just an alliance, but a community. The unexpected moment. Then, just as we were nearing agreement, the communications console beeped urgently. A transmission from the front lines. A small human Zarashi reconnaissance team had uncovered a causal cell preparing a massive attack on a vital supply station. If it succeeded, it could cripple the entire coalition's logistics for months. Without hesitation, Kale and SH Lara coordinated a joint response team. I volunteered to accompany them. The mission. We descended into the war-torn landscapes of the supply station planet, a place scarred by years of conflict, where trust was as fragile as the cracked soil beneath our feet. The enemy was cunning, using sabotage, misinformation, and psychological warfare. Our team worked in perfect sync, humans and Zarashi blending their unique skills and perspectives. We defused explosives, secured communications hubs, and confronted operatives intent on destruction. In a tense standoff, Kale and SH Lara negotiated the surrender of several rogue causal agents, turning enemies into prisoners rather than corpses. It was a testament to the new alliance's strength, diplomacy, and force, working hand in hand. Aftermath. Back on the Horizon Star, the news of the mission's success breathed new life into the negotiations. The last accord was signed, a binding treaty codifying the Joint Security Council, the quantum encryption safeguards, and mutual aid agreements. As I watched the representatives exchange handshakes and fractal forms, I felt something rare, genuine hope. Reflection. The road ahead was still uncertain. The causal threat remained, lurking in shadows. But we had crossed the fracture point. We had proven that even in the darkest times, humanity and the Zarashi could find common ground. The alliance was no longer just a fragile truce. It was a living, breathing testament to resilience, empathy, and shared destiny. Closing thoughts. I sat in the observation deck afterward, staring out at the stars. They seemed somehow brighter, more alive. Because out there, beyond the void, we had forged something new. Not just an alliance, but a family. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that together, we could face whatever came next.